on the theme AI, indigenous knowledge, and sustainable development, and some thoughts. Professor Prasad is a distinguished socio-cultural anthropologist with over 40 years of teaching and research experience. He holds a Ph.D. in anthropology from University of Mysore, completed through the Institute for Social and Economic Change, ISEC Bangalore, under the mentorship of the late Professor Srinivas, a luminary in Indian sociology and anthropology. And also, he is former professor head of both Department of Anthropology and Department of Education, and the honorary professor at the Center for Digital Learning, Training and Resources, University of Hyderabad. And currently, Professor Prasad is a member of the Information Ethics Working Group of UNESCO IFAP Information for All program, and he is actively associated with Translation Commons. With such a rich background in both anthropology and digital learning, he brings a unique perspective to the intersections of technology, indigenous knowledge, and sustainability. So, please join me in warmly welcoming our esteemed speaker, Professor Siva Prasad.
Where is that? Because your icons are. Okay, it's here. Okay, thank you. Yeah. Good afternoon and post lunch is a little difficult to keep people awake. But I'll try my best so that because otherwise I'll fall asleep if you don't sleep. So I don't want that to happen. In fact, I chose this. I've been working on the digital aspects, especially how they can be of help in multifarious ways, not just only for the indigenous communities alone, but also for the largely humanity. So this is where I thought I must share a few thoughts on this. Let me first, because when I'm using the word indigenous knowledge, it is also used as local knowledge, also used as indigenous technical knowledge or technological knowledge, etc. It whatever be the other kinds of things, it's a knowledge available with the people. And when we talk about indigenous knowledge, it is also not a single kind of a thing, it's a multi-dimensional kind of an aspect. It is based on accumulated experiences, in the sense that these experiences are based on their own experiments in life. That is, by trial and error methods, they have done that. Because another thing that is important for us is they are a very close link with the nature, because they live in the midst of the nature. Nature gives them everything. That's the reason why you find a kind of knowledge which is actually practical. And in fact, this knowledge is with the people. They have the control, and the knowledge is based on actual kind of situations that they live in, the kind of resources that they make use of, and they also know which works, which doesn't work. See, this is the clarity that we find among the people. You take this during this kind of a thing, it works. In another context, it may not work, because whether and other kinds of things change, many other things change. So they know what works and what doesn't work, and how any change in any one aspect brings other changes in other aspects. That is what we talk about is a kind of systems theory. In one aspect, it affects all the. What is holism and I think we talk about is from that angle. And in a way, this is very important for them, because they always wanted to live harmoniously with the nature, because it is the nature which gives them their sustenance, their livelihood, or many things. I would call this the indigenous knowledge as people's science. It is people's science because they have, we see, in fact, if you any of you recall what Althusser says, how concrete knowledge emerges. It's based on the past kind of this thing, people from more nonsensical to less nonsensical, they move. That is how clarity emerges as they experience and then grow. This is exactly what happens with them. It is a science practiced by them, experienced by them, and then based on trial and error methods. So it's only that they don't publish like us. Yeah, otherwise they would have been biggest scientists. And in fact, you'll find their significance in many aspects today. A lot of recognition is now happening because of that. And this knowledge is basically linked to their livelihoods, their resources, the language, because the idiom of the language is also very important. And also, you name, it is there for many aspects. It's linked to many aspects. And in fact, it is not just one area that is linked to. It's you name, whether it is agronomy, or it is forecasting weather, or it is forecasting even other kinds of events, or what kind of crops can come in what soil. All that they have. Health, the indigenous health knowledge is enormous. The kind of pharmacopoeia and other kinds of things that they have. And in other words, it's a multiple systems of knowledge. And all those multiple systems of knowledge, not separated like our specialization that we have today. They are, because they are part of the same thing, because it's the way, because they live with the nature. Nature doesn't make all those distinctions. That's what they believe in. In other words, it is basically the knowledge is linked to practices. The reason why I chose linked to that theme is partly because of this. It is linked to the practices. The beliefs are part of that practices to control, also to regulate the behavior of the people, not to do something against the nature. Because they don't blame the nature, they blame themselves for this. Whereas today we blame the nature, saying that climate change is happening. We have a very attitude quite contrary to what we find among the indigenous communities. And in a way, because these are all linked to many things, if you dismantle that kind of a knowledge, it is not only affecting the communities, but also it affects the environment. That's what we are seeing today, many aspects. Now, we also find a kind of a knowledge hierarchy today. So, first of all, let us understand, like language, knowledge is also power. And if you destroy that knowledge, then you destroy a people. You destroy a way of life of a people. And which means that you can control them. They get subjugated. And in other words, what happens is, it also kills your diversities. Diversities in terms of natural and physical and other kinds of diversities. And also distinct way of life of people. Because each distinct way has its link with the resources, linked with many other kinds of things. And that is where, any destruction of that has a negative bearing on the environment, on the livelihoods and biodiversity, including the polity, the way the polity emerges and all that. Because you control, you make other people to subjugate. Even if they are, preponderantly large in number, they can get controlled. And that means the negative effects of all this, whether it is modernity you call, globalization or liberalization, what they have done is, they are leading us to monocultures. Even many languages are dying, which never happened. Oral cultures, oral languages survived for centuries, but they are quickly going, thanks to these processes. And this has not only led to monocultures, like your plant species are also monocultures now. You look at the biodiverse forest, it's not there. Either eucalyptus or something, they quickly grow. Because satellites images, when they started coming, the foresters wanted to quickly grow, something grows fast. Whether that is suitable to the particular climate, although they are not bothered. But this is how we have destroyed biodiversity. So it is leading to monocultures, and it is monocultures everywhere, including development. Kanyakumari to Kashmir, or this side Nagaland to Gujarat, we have the same developmental programs which are unsuitable to local conditions, but still they pursue. This is where this kind of monocultures, including law, justice, polity, all centralized. If you really look at the legal system, the people who are really, especially the Adivasi communities, they become criminals in the eyes of our criminal justice. Their systems are different. And this is where, whether it is any area you take, in many aspects that we look at, including morality and all that, there is a monoculture, the dominant structures, and which means that we have a knowledge hierarchy. Knowledge hierarchy which is there among the dominant communities who think that these indigenous or traditional knowledges are inferior. And they say that, inferior to modern scientific quote unquote knowledge. And I would call this as a kind of arrogance. It's the arrogance of knowledge of the powerful, dominant, so-called development-oriented, I would call self-seeking intellectuals or administrators, or you name any. The reason why we need to be, as anthropologists, we are more sensitive to the knowledge of the people because we know how important that is locally. So the present state of environment is because of that arrogance, is because of the negligence of kinds of things that happen. So you find your loss of biodiversity today, diversity of food is gone. If you go to any place, even in a community to community, so much of food diversity used to be there. Now you don't find. You only have some departmental stores, they get it somewhere and then feed you. All recipes of the grandmothers and other mothers, they're all gone. And that means what is happening is all this biodiversity, diversity of foods, diversity of knowledges, including knowledge about resources, the diversity of resources, all are completely gone because they were actually surviving that time because of the efficient management of the communities. And that losing all of that is because of this hierarchical attitude towards knowledge. So indigenous and marginalized societies always considered a knowledge is not for personal gain. Knowledge is for community's gain. That means only certain kind of knowledge is specialized where it is known to only specialized people. But they don't use that knowledge for any self-benefit. And that means that anybody, because that is the reason why they don't allow to reveal the names of the plants or other kinds of things which are medicinally and otherwise very important, because we have vultures, pharmaceutical companies and others, they'll come and take that and then they've done it. In fact, there's a classical example you can see in Kani tribe. I'm talking about patents issues. It was done by scientists from I think ICMR, but ultimately they gave a patent, but that patent did not work because it is not individuals, it is communities. We don't have patents for communities. So these are important kind of things we must keep in mind, because the dominant cultures always look down upon these indigenous communities, their knowledge systems, but if they find it is very useful to make money, they use it. If there is a commercial value, they are there for it. And in other words, there are quite a few of examples with regard to the benefits. In fact, Kani tribe's example is, in fact, some Ayurvedic, this thing was developed. You can search in Google, Kani tribe, about that thing. They have, when the scientists were walking along with them in the forest, the scientists were getting tired. These fellows were happy, they were not eating much. They were on the way, they were picking some leaves and chewing and then going. Then they've asked how it happened. Then they mentioned, this is the leaf it gives us. That they have worked on and patented. And they get the patent because patents are individualistic. And you gain. Whereas the other fellows, He was a key informant. They gave key informant patent. He said, this is not my knowledge, it's my community's knowledge. How can you give me alone? They have no answer, because our system has no answer. Our government or policies do not have an answer for that. So that's where you'll find how people have realized, after that tsunami in Andamans, people have realized the knowledge of the indigenous communities is most important. They by observing the movement of ants and other kinds of birds and other things, they can tell something is going to happen. Exactly, it happens. Your earth scientists or seismologists and others may not be able to immediately predict. Only afterwards they will predict. That's how they moved up. They were not, they never suffered. Others suffered. Highly educated people died. So this is where people started realizing this knowledge, which earlier anthropologists were talking about, is useful. That's why you'll find today, you search, you'll find how indigenous knowledge can be used in disaster management or environmental or biodiversity or agriculture. That's how people are trying to use it. So, and some people like, turmeric and others, they have tried to patent. And people have fought. Many of our activists, including Vandana Shiva and others, whom I knew her when she was in IIM Bangalore. We used to work because one of our anthropologist friends was the one who was helping her. And he's no more. But on eucalyptus, when they were working, they were against the eucalyptus, how eucalyptus affects because eucalyptus leaves don't putrefy. Therefore, it will not help. The soil, it doesn't hold, the roots don't hold. So they suggested you put it all along the drainages so that drain water can be taken. So there are a lot of other, they use that knowledge of the people and tried that. So it means that we need to question, or at least one question we need to ask ourselves, whose knowledge counts? And who matter in this kind of a knowledge? And given this, I was talking about this ideological contrast. That is, indigenous or tribal communities, I generally don't use the word tribal communities, but Adivasis we use, but it's the terminology that is ingrained in our usage, including our constitution. So only for that knowledge sake I'm doing it. So these communities are communitarian, never individualistic. They have a concept of sharing. I'm sure you must have watched the famous film, Gods Must Be Crazy. The South African film. It must be seen because it's an anthropological kind of film, worth watching it. The sequel also to that came. The reason why I'm saying that they are communitarian, they always share. They don't take, or only individuals don't enjoy. They say that community is important. If community survives, individuals survive. So community and not the individual for them is important. So in modern state, what you find, in the contrast to that, it imposes the concept of individualism. Now we have the individual beneficiaries. Land has to be registered in the individuals. Tribal, most of the Adivasi lands are in community. Now, where do you register? You can't give pattas to community. This is the kind of, that means we talk about individual beneficiaries. You are undermining the community. We are undermining even common pool resources, which were traditionally managed. And I quickly run through because next couple of speakers are there. I don't want to take much time. So indigenous communities, as I said, earn their livelihood from the environment which is there around them, and they have that's where in fact we find the concept of ecological niche in a way works in that. Some people use the same resource differently, and that's where they have specific knowledge even about the kind of resource that are there. That knowledge becomes important for them because it can help in maintaining the resources. Because the maintaining the resources is in their interest. It helps them to sustain their livelihoods. So this is the reason why you don't find any of these communities abusing the nature. Because they feel that if we abuse the nature, we'll have to face the wrath of the nature. And that's what we are doing today. All your changes that are happening, you construct something which you are not supposed to do in the Himalayan ranges, and now we see the kind of, we say cloud burst and all that. what all as if the curve bursts happening now, as if they never happened earlier. So we have never tried to be, at least try to understand things as they were supposed to be there. In fact, this is the reason why you'll find the idea of these communities is that they think that they are not the only creation of the nature. Along with them, every creature in the nature has a right. It's not only as an individual I have a right, or as a community. They don't take a precedence over the others. That's the reason why, the kind of change that are happening in natural cycles are, in fact, they actually upset them. But at this same time, they don't. One thing we find, in the past, there were food shortages. You will find among many of the Adivasi communities, they know how to handle food shortages during crisis periods. Summers, when there is something, they preserve something. There is diversity and to protect themselves. So, in fact, you never heard, or you even to a larger extent, you never hear the starvation deaths, which are very common today among the farmers, suicides and all that are kind of a thing. They are our contribution, our so-called development contribution. So I would say, thanks to development, the traditional wisdom has become irrelevant and unusable today, because it become irrelevant because you have changed everything. All the resources, everything you have changed. How can you apply? If I bring a chenchu from Nalamala region to Hyderabad, where will he hunt? Where will he go for food gathering? His knowledge is useless. So we have made that unusable, we have made that as irrelevant. But which means that it has led to livelihood crisis, and it has that they started becoming dependent on the government. That's why for everything they'll say, my bap, government has to come in. They were never said that. They were independent people. They always said that it is we have to do it. They never asked for anybody to help them. They never sought. Even during the British they fought, but they never went for the British this thing. They never surrendered. And that is why you'll find, you find that why they take interest in conserving. In fact, Unquiet Woods by Ramchandra Guha says, if they are alienated, they cut their own trees. That's what is happening today, because they are working as laborers for the forest department to lopping and other things. So these communities have their customs and all the in tune with the natural surroundings, natural resources. Therefore, you always find a kind of symbiotic relationship. And this is where the contrary is very clearly visible. Government and others, like your corporates and others, for them it is resources for input for development. Like your mining and other kinds of things, they use it. So you must understand here why the governments think using of resources for development is against actually sustainability. Because the indigenous and other rural marginal communities actually have this basic difference in terms of understanding. So in other words, what is required today is there is a change in the attitude of the so-called mainstream towards the development, towards resources and livelihoods of indigenous communities. This change in attitude is not for them, it is for us, for survival. And that's the reason why I will quickly, because sustainable development, many of you know, I don't need to go much deeper into that. But then, in sustainable development, there are contradictions. Very word development that we use, there's a lot of contradictions in that. Here, when I'm talking about sustainable development here, basically, if you don't use resources, natural resources, that is the only way to generate energy and other requirements. Now, another side you are talking about not to use them, leave it for future generations. Other side, we are using them for development, for GDP and other kinds of things. So that means there is a contradiction between economic growth and sustained use of environment, which means that this itself is causing income inequalities, and it is causing or is upsetting the well-being of the people. And that means major share of destroying the environment basically comes from the expanding capital and technology. Today we have a technology which can cut trees in minutes. Earlier, at least they were using axe, and to cut a tree, at least one day they were taking. But no, you don't need. You can clear, like what is happening in, I think, Chhattisgarh or somewhere. The entire forest is completely removed because somebody wants to develop that into a kind of mining and other things. Now, this is the state of affairs. So, the policies and legal frameworks also of the governments, successive governments, they go against the very principle of sustainable development 2030. We had Millennium Development Goals. Now sustainable development has come. Another word will be added. Something will come. So, achieving sustainable development without addressing these contradictions, is it possible? That's one thing. And without removing these inequalities, whether they're economic, social, climate, or whatever you call, because they are all rooted in colonialism and so-called globalization. In fact, Noam Chomsky said globalization was there more than 250 years old. And so today, looking at the so-called climate change that we talk about, many of these knowledges and practices are recognized as solutions to sustainable development goals, meeting that. So since sustainable development continues to follow the same economic logic of development, the challenge is how to break away from that. Otherwise, how can you have sustainable development? So this is where I will come to this thing. After that, I'll quickly sum it up. So sustainable development and IK are linked, as we are talking about. And in this, there are three elements. One is resources, second is knowledge, third one is livelihoods. And that means you have a link between resources and knowledge, knowledge and livelihoods. If there is anything that changes or breaks, it becomes unusable. So they are not only interdependent and related, but they reinforce each one. And in other words, sustainability of all the three is important for very sustainable development itself. And this is what I usually talk about. You see, if you look at first half here, this first half, when you look at the top portion in the triangle, first half is for government and external agencies. They'll only look at that. They don't bother about the community's knowledge. They don't bother about the livelihood of the people. Whereas for the people, entire pyramid is very important. So this is where, unless we take all that, that is where you can see the arrows from each one, how they are interacting. And in fact, if you disrupt any of these interrelationships, it can disrupt sustainable living, it can lead to subordination, or lead people to, because the dominant kinds of people or invading groups can take over everything. That's what happened everywhere. Among all the three, most important is resources. And because knowledge and livelihoods are dependent on the resources. If I have knowledge, if I have a resource, I have knowledge about it. I use that knowledge, eke out a livelihood. But a resource itself is completely gone. It changed. Like if you build, there is a pond in the village, you fill it up completely, there is no pond. All the people who are depending on that, they have no livelihood. So you find that knowledge may be there, but when the resource is absent, you can't do anything else. So unless we understand this intricate relationship among the three, we cannot talk about any designing development programs. If you want to design development program, this is very important. So it's also important for sustainable development. So in fact, it is basically, when we talk about abundancy of resources, when they were there, people were small in number and they were using it carefully. But those resources, if they are taken over and the entire nature is altered, it affects these relationships. So this causes basically a decline or neglect of indigenous knowledge. Since that loses its relevance in the changed context, nobody cares for it. So in a way, the usefulness of knowledge basically is related to its utility. So long as it is usable or it is used, it survives. Once it is not there, it loses its. That's what is happening with our indigenous knowledge systems. Let me come to AI, and after this I'll quickly conclude it. Now, AI is artificial intelligence and digital technologies. Actually, today, since I've been working with quite a few multidisciplinary people in the area of knowledge, in the area of languages, in the area of knowledge and other things, or where I really gained a lot of understanding about it. In fact, they can actually, indigenous knowledge can be embedded into AI or digital technologies, because that will help not only in safeguarding your nature, livelihoods, economies, language, or even building sustainable societies. In fact, now when I'm saying these AI or technologies, in the digital technologies can be helpful, one thing that we need to ask, whether the tech companies, technology companies, do they have any interest, or corporates and others relating to, because they don't give IPRs to these communities, intellectual property rights. And you see, if I am giving my knowledge, because indigenous communities give their knowledge, give their data, because the data is important for your developing your softwares and other kinds of things. In fact, your behavior, many anthropologists work with Microsoft and others, because your behavior, all your apps developed are based on behavior. And that behavior, if it has to be looked at, how can you look at it without understanding how people interact with you? That's how they use it, and they use the same thing on us, and then bias, or your WhatsApp universities can brainwash you. This is how people, in fact, traditionally anthropologists are talking about how rumors can be used as a kind of thing. Now we don't have to use that. We have misinformation, all the kinds of things can be used to this. So how pertinent it is, because will they take interest? Because in fact, can we take these local communities into confidence in the process of digitization of their knowledge and languages? Without that, because they have the right, that is their data, they have a right to participate in that, they have a right to withdraw. And when we interview people, they can withdraw any time. But here, once you take the data, all your data that you feed, all is sold to multinational companies. If you just put one word, next day you'll get half a dozen mails that so gold rate is so much, this is so much, you get. Google itself is spying on you. We have so much of these things. We must be clear about what is happening. So whether AI and digital technology industries have any interest to digitize the languages and knowledge systems of the underprivileged, unless that knowledge generates economic gain for them. Now there are ways, that's what we are working out. They have to take interest because that helps them. At the same time, they need to be given rights. So what is happening is, in this process, governments basically side with the tech companies. But if the governments also bring in their pressure, they will fall in line. And that means what is required is, we need to co-develop these things with the people, so that the people have control over their data. They have a right over that. So, in fact, unless we try and address our this thing to these questions, we will not be able to talk about digitizing indigenous knowledge and indigenous languages. So AI and digital technologies are important because IK database, existing database, knowledge systems, it should be transposed into that. That they need a lot of data. That where you get, you work with the communities, and it is not something universal, it is local, and that is very important for us to keep in mind. The AI-driven software, in fact, there is a group of people, that is the indigenous protocol. You can see in 2020, it was published by a few Aboriginal scientists, especially technologists from Australia. They worked on this, and that is here, what they said was, AI-driven software with indigenous knowledge can solve complex problems. They've established it in the areas of agriculture, health, environment management, or you name anything. And that's what they felt. If you want to do this, it is essential for us to engage indigenous communities in building sustainable societies. Unless you work with them, you cannot get that. Because it has to be understood in their epistemologies, not in the epistemology of yours. So, because their epistemologies are important in digitizing and also to provide effective local solutions to the problems. So, apart from preserving indigenous knowledge, which is important, but we are not saying preservation is important. What is important is how to use that to protect the world's natural resources. In fact, many of you might know, world's indigenous communities population is 6%. But 80% of the biodiversity is surviving because of the 6% only, not because of the majority. So here, what I am trying to suggest as a kind of this thing is, AI localization is important. It is not, you cannot have universal, like any law has to be local, not universal. Or any system has to be local, because it can't be universal. Because that's how people work within themselves. Environment exists for them in the locally, not outside. If you are catching cold in Hyderabad and catching cold in Himalayas is totally different. So you must understand that why people have explanations differently. So because AI actually need to be developed with the local epistemologies to provide effective solutions. And it was here I was to cite Indigenous Protocol and Artificial Intelligence Working Group. They have said the Western rationalist epistemologies out of which AI is being developed are too limited in their range of imagination, frameworks, and effectively engage alone with the new ontologies created by future generations of computational systems. This is absolutely very important. So in contrast, what they try to say is AI subsets created based on local epistemologies and local language models, not large language models, local language models, for their generation will be more effective and usable for application. So what we need is to create indigenous AI in order to protect the identities, cultural ethos of the marginalized groups across the globe. This is what one of the persons worked in India has done that. So indigenous in fact, what you find is the data sovereignty movement is one of the things, very important one. And they're fighting for the rights of the data and everything of the indigenous community. In fact, you can see that it is cited. In practice, which means that indigenous people need to be decision makers. When that's my data, I should have the right to decision makers. How data about them is to be used or deployed, including within the social program algorithms. And in fact, this helps in maintenance of proper protocols in terms of initiating or maintaining or evolving relationship with not only human beings, but with the animals and other humans and other non-humans. That's how indigenous epistemologies talk about. So it is in tune with the cultural and other ethos or values of the communities. So it should be, we have to mention here, the notions of inclusivity has a different meaning in traditional epistemologies than what we talk about. It includes not only different social groups, as we generally look at, but it also includes living beings in the universe. And the last of the things is that is AI and digital technology corporates will definitely take interest, I said, if they find. That means we have to show to them how that is important. If you have local problems, solutions, including environment problems, solutions that can be brought out, they will come running because that will give them money. And so indigenous communities should become partners in such co-production to share the economic returns once that is generated. The governments can encourage and also regulate such collaborative efforts. Otherwise, government takes sides. And this will enable the governments to maintain data sovereignty and privacy and interests of the indigenous community. So this involves a participation of the communities. Therefore, they should have equal right and control over their own knowledge. And this is the last slide. It is therefore essential for the parties involved to ensure the intellectual property rights of the communities involved. We need to define how intellectual property rights are to be given. Indigenous epistemologies are comprehensive and inclusive. These things are not. And solutions which are intrinsically proposed in local epistemologies with localized technologies contribute to sustainability of both the environment and societies. So in a way, what we call localized AI, which is in a sense, it's called responsible AI. In fact, Professor Patnaik was morning telling responsible anthropology. This is exactly what we need to. That it will contribute to real linguistic, cultural and biodiverse universe. So this is what is the last slide. What is that we gain? The knowledge that we record will give us holistic understanding of the knowledge and its multifarious kind of linkages with many aspects. This will also give us an understanding of the organic linkages and their immense value to restore the proper management of resources and their vibrancy. So it is here, retrieval of this knowledge is in the interest of the humanity, not in the interest of the only indigenous communities. So more sustainable livelihoods, more environment, because now you see that earlier when we were in the university, earlier stages, our colleges, there are so many livelihood diversities. Now you don't find it. In the villages you go, all 2-3 kinds of categories only. So it is, in fact, it can help in restoring the multicultural base of society. Thank you. I took a longer time. I'm sorry for that.